America's freedoms are under attack, and I'm sad to say that the students at my alma mater, Yale University, are leading the charge. A new video shows dozens of the Elis signing a petition to overturn the First Amendment.
CBN News reported on a growing number of students at several colleges calling for limits on free speech. But as Caitlin Burke reports, the students at Yale are taking it to a whole new level.
This video shows filmmaker and satirist Ami Horowitz on the campus of Yale University. He's asking students to sign a petition calling for a repeal of the First Amendment. That amendment upholds the free exercise of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to peacefully assemble, and the right to petition.
What we're calling for is a petition to repeal the First Amendment.
A Yale spokesman called the clip a heavily edited prank video, but Horowitz says he was able to quickly gather more than 50 signatures in less than an hour. Many of those who signed, he believes, were students. Free speech advocates like Ari Khan at FIRE say the video is cause for concern.
I think it is indicative of a broader trend that we've seen on college campuses lately of subserviating free speech to sensibilities and feelings. And I think that's noteworthy in and of itself.
In the last several decades, hundreds of universities have adopted speech codes. These campus policies consistently violate the First Amendment by prohibiting offensive or disrespectful speech. Now, at campuses across the country, First Amendment advocates are seeking to push back on these codes.
Censorship is like a cancer that eventually spreads out of control, and eventually everyone has something to worry about.
The big concern? Students are now the ones calling for restrictions.
The terrifying thing to me is that the current wave of censorship is coming from the students, not from the faculty.
Still, it's a big leap for students to want to overthrow the First Amendment, as the Yale video apparently shows.
I think students often don't consider the practical implications of arguments against free speech. And I think that the video maybe in some way exposes that because, ironically, abolishing the First Amendment would abolish Horowitz's right to circulate such a petition and the students' right to sign such a petition.
Free speech advocates say this video should serve as a wake-up call. Apparently, a new generation doesn't view the First Amendment the way so many Americans have for so long. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Well, I'm pleased to say that some years ago, I'm a 1955 graduate of Yale Law School, and when I went there, it was considered the #1 law school in the nation. Recently, as an alumnus, I received a booklet from Yale Law School. Here's the booklet, and it's called Reading the Koran as a Law Book. It's from a lecture by Joseph Lowry, an associate professor from the University of Pennsylvania. And Mr. Lowry believes the Koran should be taken seriously as a book of laws. And this follows Yale's decision to create a Center for Islamic Law and Civilization after a Saudi businessman gave a $10 million donation to the law school. The dean says, and I quote, "Islamic law has a long and proud tradition which encompasses great intellectual achievements." He's got to be kidding. This is Yale Law School. They're in the tank to the Saudis. Well, anyhow, join us now by satellite is Danny Slayman. Danny is an expert in Islamic law. Of course, he speaks fluent Arabic. And Danny, you read this booklet and you listened to the lecture by Professor Lowry. What is he trying to say?
Good morning, Pat. Basically, he's trying to allude that the commandments in the Quran are optional. He said, they're not specific, and we should basically take them as figuratively or symbolic and not literal. In fact, he called the traditional interpretations are as not true, and the Quran is highly mystical and spiritual. People are taking the laws in the Quran as too seriously as he basically described it.
Well, many of the Islamic laws don't even come from the Quran. And how does Professor Lowry deal with that, the Hadith and the Surahs?
Well, You're right, Pat. Basically, the Quran is the solid ground, is the foundation on which every Muslim follows. There's no such thing as figuratively or optional. They have to follow the commandments of the Quran. So I'm really not sure what he's basing it on. In fact, I read his book, and most of his descriptions were like suggested. He's using the terms like suggested and great unknown and no real evidence and assume. So he's trying to draw a theory. He's trying to somehow dig out of it a way to show that the Quran has some peaceful verses, or you can get a law and we can follow it.
Well, look, you've got the Sharia stuff, which is their law code, and it has to do with the subjugation of women. It has to do with a husband having the privilege of beating his wife. It has to do with beheadings. It has to do with cutting off the hands of malefactors. How does he deal with all those things?
Well, in fact, he's trying to tell people, like, when you read the Quran, you have to take and see how the people received it in the early days of Islam. So his whole premise, basically, he said, when the Quran was delivered, it was immensely attractive. So let's see why this Quran was attractive, and let's follow it. So they must have a different understanding. They must have seen it from a different angle. In fact, Pat, if you study the history of Islam, you will find out that in the early days, when these peaceful verses were like around 2/3 of the Quran was written, were not accepted by the people. In fact, they tried to kill him and he had to flee. And then when he became strong and he came back with the violent verses, which abrogated all the previous verses, then he forced these verses on people. So I'm not sure where Mr. Lowry is, what he's referring to. And you're right regarding the Sharia law. Basically, what the Sharia law is, you take the commandments of the Quran and you read about the life of Muhammad, you put it together, and that's what Sharia law is.
Danny, I went to Yale Law School. It is a proud law, and when I went there, it was considered the #1 law school in the nation. Harvard would dispute it, but nevertheless, I thought it was #1 in the country. What is the danger of a law school using the Quran as a law book with a, quote, proud tradition? What do you say to that?
Again, I mean, the Quran is basically a commandment. It's a law. It's the principles in their understanding that Allah wants every single one to follow these words. So when Yale University is trying to basically endorse or apply the laws, then there will be no separation between the state and Islam. And basically, if we need to see an actual, practical Islamic state, look at the Islamic State in Iraq and in Syria. They're not drawing from their constitution, from anything else but from the Quran.
Well, Danny, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm appalled, frankly, but Yale, our news department questioned the officials at Yale Law School, and they said, quote, given our educational mission, we like to disseminate these kinds of materials as broadly as possible so that people can study and debate the important issues of the day. They put the imprimatur of Yale, and I hate to use the term, they're in the tank to the Saudis, but if Saudi gives you $10 million, you better toe their line. You know, they talk about the golden rule, and he has the gold rules. Well, it's obviously they bought off Yale, and the series of these monographs, this isn't the only one they're passing out with that money, but it's amazing to see.
The thing is also, Pat, when you talk about studying and having, your mind enlightened by these things, to have students so unaware of the merit of the Constitution is just beyond belief in an academic place like that.
They all go together, and it shows how impressionable they are. But anyhow, as a former alum, I'm not a former alum, I'm an alum, I'm appalled. But they send this out to all the alumni. I got one, I didn't ask for it, but it comes in the mail, courtesy of Saudi Arabia via the Yale Law School. Well, Wendy, we've started the ball rolling. What do you got now?
Thanks, Pat. Well, Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton is being called out for telling a tall tale about Donald Trump in Saturday's Democratic debate.
He is becoming ISIS's best recruiter. They are going to people showing videos of Donald Trump insulting Islam and Muslims in order to recruit more radical jihadists.
She just made it up. I mean, she made it up. It was a soundbite.
Trump told NBC's Meet the Press that Clinton, quote, lies like crazy about everything. On Sunday, a Clinton spokeswoman defended her, saying the campaign was not aware of any particular ISIS video showing Trump, but that the terror group is using Trump on social media for propaganda. A horrible sight in Las Vegas last night. A woman plowed her car into dozens of pedestrians, killing at least one person and injuring at least 30 others. Investigators say it was intentional, but they say it was not a terrorist attack. Witnesses say the driver knew what she was doing when she hit a group of people on the crowded Vegas Strip. Then she drove back up on the sidewalk, hitting even more.
You could see people just literally bouncing off. She was running over everybody.
Going fast, accelerated through people. Then it turned around some type of like truck or something to slow down and then accelerate again into the people. And then I couldn't see what was going on. At that point, it was mayhem. Just people down.
Can't imagine. Authorities confirmed there was a child in the car with her. The woman was eventually taken into custody. Iranian hackers took control of a small dam near New York City. The incident is still classified. It actually happened 2 years ago. It was a small dam in Rye, New York, that was targeted. The Wall Street Journal reports news about the cyber attack reached all the way to the White House. That hacking took place at a time when Iranian government hackers had also been targeting U.S. banks. Pat, it's just the latest reminder that much of America's power grid, pipelines, factories, and dams are vulnerable to internet hacking.
Well, it wasn't just one dam. From what I understand, the stories are that there were detailed plans of the entire power grid in the West Coast, where they could have shut down the power to millions of people. They had it all laid out carefully and knew exactly the choke points to enter into the computer software to make this thing happen. That just shows how vulnerable we are, ladies and gentlemen, especially cybercrime. It's something that the average person doesn't know about, doesn't think about, and yet it is a major, major issue because we are vulnerable. You know, if they can hack the command and control nodes in our computers of our military, they could paralyze the armed forces of the United States of America. They could cause planes in the air to crash. I mean, it just goes on down the line. We are so dependent on our computers, and so cyber terrorism. I'm pleased to report that Regent University is starting a major course and perhaps a degree in cybersecurity so that people who come here will be able to have access to the latest technology and how they can prevent this. But if we don't harden that grid, and it's not just some hacker, if there's of course, an electronic pulse coming out of a airborne nuclear blast would just fry the computers around the whole part of the country. But there's one that's a solar flare that could come any time. And if it does, it'll mean transformers are going to down. I'm pleased to report that a number of utilities are now hiring or buying backup generators and transformers. So if an event like this takes place and their transformers are down, they'll have spares they can put into effect. But ladies and gentlemen, what would you do without electricity? It really is a terrible prospect.